Welcome to EdLeader with your host, Dr. Rob Jackson. Join Dr. Jackson for conversations and reflections on improving educational leadership from the classroom to the boardroom and beyond. Educational leadership is an ever-evolving opportunity to make a real and lasting difference in the lives of students, parents, and the community. And now, here's your host, Dr. Rob Jackson.
Hello, and welcome to the EdLeader podcast. I'm your host, Rob Jackson, and I want to thank you for spending time with me today. The EdLeader podcast continues to grow across the country and around the world. I'm incredibly grateful for your part in that, as your reviews and shares on social media have truly made a difference in the growth of the EdLeader community. If you have not, please take a moment and leave a review on Apple Podcast or your favorite podcast player. I'm incredibly honored to speak to today's guest from the Pacific Northwest, a conversation that literally spans the breadth of the country. From her location on the coast of the Pacific Ocean to my location on the coast of the Atlantic Ocean. Let's get to it. Knowing every student by name, strength, and need is the promise of Highline Public Schools in Washington State. Under the leadership of today's guest, the district is implementing the second phase of its strategic plan committed to the academic and social-emotional growth of all students so they graduate prepared for the future they choose. A high school English, journalism, and English language learners teacher, our guest served as the Chief Academic Officer and then as the Interim Superintendent for Seattle Public Schools before arriving in Highline in 2012. She is a graduate of the University of California, Berkeley, and earned master's degrees from Stanford University and Harvard University. She also holds a doctoral degree in Administration, Planning, and Social Policy from Harvard's Urban Superintendent's Program. In 2020, she was selected for the AASA Women in School Leadership National Superintendent of the Year Award. Today's guest, my new friend, please help me welcome Dr. Susan Enfield. Dr. Enfield, what an incredible delight to have the opportunity to spend some time with you. Welcome to the EdLeader podcast.
Well, thank you so much, Rob. The delight is mine.
I'm just so excited to be able to spend some time talking with you. I've actually had the opportunity to hear you speak on some panels through AASA and have been just absolutely impressed by your commitment to every single child. And so spending time with you is something that I've been looking forward to for some time.
Oh, you're very kind. Thank you.
Well, to kind of start off our conversation and to give some context to our listeners, how about sharing with our listeners a little bit about the Highline School District, where you're located? It would be hard for you and I to be further apart in the continental U.S. than we are, as I'm on the coast of the Atlantic Ocean and you're right there at the coast of the Pacific Ocean. So we're a country apart, but we're doing very similar work. But tell our listeners about your school system.
Well, sure. So Highline Public Schools is a richly diverse school system serving about 17,500 students. We are located just south of Seattle. So when you land at SeaTac International Airport, our district surrounds the airport. So that's where we're located. And as I said, we're richly diverse. Our student body, over 100 different languages are spoken amongst our students, the top ones being Spanish, Vietnamese, and Somali. So when I say diverse, I mean diverse. And beautifully, our community sees that diversity as a point of pride and as a real asset. So I'm finishing my 9th year in Highline. I came here in 2012. And when I arrived, we had an opportunity to embark on a new strategic plan. And out of that plan emerged our Highline Promise. So rather than a mission or vision, which I believe can be somewhat platitudey and one-dimensional, a promise implies action. And so our promise in Highline is to know every student by name, strength, and need so they graduate prepared for the future they choose. And I would argue that that promise in and of itself is a commitment to equity. Because if we could say that we knew every child in our public education system by name and by strength and by need, and that we were preparing them to graduate for a future that they chose for themselves, not one that was predetermined for them, either because of opportunities denied or opportunities implied or not there. I think that we wouldn't be having all of the conversations about equity that we're having today. So that promise is really the DNA of our system. And, as an urban district, our students, whom we describe as brilliant, beautiful, and brimming with promise, also come, sadly, with all of the challenges that are inherent in too many of our urban systems today. Roughly 7 out of 10 of our children rely on us for most of their meals. And we deal with all of the challenges that are all too common in our urban communities. But the beauty of Highline is we have a staff and a community here who refuses to let the challenges facing our children become barriers to their achieving whatever they want.
I tell you, I just love hearing you speak, particularly when you start talking about the Highline Promise, because I want to stand up and cheer, throw my hands in the air and say, absolutely, 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 knowing every single student by their name, by their strength, and by their need. That's the work, right? That's individualized education. That's
Totally.
truly making a difference and really moving the needle for every single student. I get so excited when I hear you speak. And, as you were sharing some of the needs of the students and needs, for example, around hunger, you serve on the West Coast. I'm here on the East Coast. You're in an urban district. I'm in a rural district. And as different as those can be, there's also striking similarities in things like childhood hunger. And I'm sure at this past year in the pandemic, you've had to figure out how to feed children who weren't coming to school. And we certainly had to do that as well, putting food on buses to get food out to the students. But speaking of the pandemic, what has that been like for Highline? Have your students been in school? Have they been virtual? Just a little context around education as it existed this past year.
Yeah, this is interesting, Rob. I think the pandemic has really amplified just the degree to which politics, particularly local politics, plays into public education. And so depending on where you were in the country, that was going to dictate whether or not you were going to come back to school in person. So where we are in the Puget Sound area, we were some of the last to return to in-person learning. So it wasn't until March of 2021 that we began bringing children, elementary students back who chose to. Now, we had brought about 150 of our students with the most profound special needs back in November, but those were very small numbers. In March, we began bringing back our pre-K through 5 students, those who wanted to. So about 45% chose to come back. And then we brought back middle and high after that. So our secondary students were out of their school buildings for well over a year. And some have been out since March of 2020 when we closed. So we were shut down much more so than, my colleagues in other part of the country. I think history will determine who got it right and who got it wrong. Right. I don't know that we know that at this point. Was I angry and heartbroken every day that I saw students in Texas and Illinois and Ohio and Wisconsin and other places getting to go into their school and have sporting events and all of that, knowing that my children in Highline were not getting those opportunities? Yes. And at the same time, when I know that our region also had some of the lowest death rates from COVID anywhere in the country. We're now leading the nation in vaccinations. So as I said, I don't know when the history books are written, how it's going to fall. But my gut tells me that for those of us for whom our children were kept out of their school buildings for so long, I don't think we got that right.
Right. Like you said, it was so painful, and it's just absolutely fascinating. And that's probably a terrible description of it, to think about the difference in educational experience children had. And so here in North Carolina, our children started the school year back in August on a hybrid model. So they were in school a couple of days a week. And then in October, our elementary students went back 5 days a week. And in March, our middle school and high school students were back. And so, as you said, as I think about things like equity, and we created a very inequitable situation just based on not having access to face-to-face learning, or potentially being in a situation where maybe there was more opportunity for the virus to spread.
Right.
It's really interesting to think about. It's really interesting to think about, and really interesting to think about history really doing that research. I mean, it's almost the perfect research study in terms of, I'm not sure which is the control group, but there's a lot of experimental groups, right?
No, for sure. I was frustrated a lot with our local officials at the state level. I won't even get into the national level, but at the state level was frustrated, and at the local level. And now that we're able to look at some of this in the rearview mirror, not all of it, we're not through it, but some of it now we can look back on. I've come to realize that everyone, I think, was just doing the best they can with an ever-changing landscape, right? The information, what we were learning was changing so fast. And I do believe that even people that I've been very critical of in my state were doing the best they had with the knowledge they had at the time.
Absolutely.
And so, it's been a challenge. I mean, having to respond and turn on a dime. And I don't know if you've had this experience, Rob, but, people are hurt and they're angry. And, as one of my seniors in 2020 said to me, when I announced that we couldn't have in-person graduation ceremonies, we were going to have drive-through. And he said, is there someone we can sue? And I said, oh, honey, you can't sue a virus. But I say that because people want something or someone to blame. And I think superintendents, in too many cases, sadly, have become that someone. And I think we're the ones that people in the local community have lashed out at. And I think that's taken a toll on some of our colleagues, which is really tough.
You are absolutely right. And you and I both know, having both persisted as superintendents for some amount of time, you've been a superintendent a couple of years longer than I have. I have certainly seen superintendents that I thought very highly of. I thought they were skilled educators.
Yep.
Who just weren't given the opportunity to serve a district for a long amount of time. It seems like the national average is 2 or 3 years, depending on what you look at. And it's so sad.
Well, and I read a story just this week. I was reading Education Week and read a story about a superintendent who was relieved of his duties for carrying out the actions the board wanted him to carry out. And so, I think some of us are put in untenable positions, or have been put in truly untenable positions. And for those of us who haven't been put in a position where our job has been at risk, we certainly have been put consistently in situations where there were no good decisions to be made. I mean, I think that, I think as superintendents, as any leaders, we're used to making hard decisions. We're used to making unpopular decisions. But to be in a position where there were no good options, it's like, what's the least bad decision I can make here? That is not a fun position to be in.
That's right. I think that educational leaders have lived this past year literally between a rock and a hard place. That's been where we've been trying to move our way forward. Well, speaking of this year, and you started off by sharing with us the Highline Promise that, again, I've just absolutely loved. I know that it's built on a foundation, and that foundation has 4 principles, those being equity, instruction, relationships, and support. As I think about the Highline Promise, and as you've described the students being in virtual learning for almost the majority of the year, knowing that instruction is foundational to that Highline Promise, tell me about instruction there in Highline Schools. What does that look like? How have you tried to grow that as teachers were asked to teach in ways that many hadn't taught before?
Yeah, I will be honest. I think that my priorities sort of moved with the moment and the need. So initially, when we knew that we were going to have to close, I was concerned about getting every child food and home broadband access and a device. Like, we had to make sure that they had those basic things, or else they were not going to be able to go to school. So once we knew that our kids had food, they all had a working device. The home broadband access was an ongoing, that was more of a lift. And I'm sure in a rural area, you've struggled with that as well. And I've lobbied pretty hard that we really need to take that on more seriously. I then really said to we had a whole child planning team. We had several planning teams. And one of them, I said, I know as a former high school teacher that a child, whether they're 5 or 15, needs one meaningful relationship with an adult in their school building. They don't need to have a meaningful relationship with every adult, but it takes one. It only takes one adult to keep a kid connected and known that they're cared for and seen and all of that. So I knew that since our children were going to be in a remote learning environment, that connection was going to be more important than ever, even if it had to happen through, a video screen. So we sort of came up with what we called our one-to-one connection model. And I asked our building principals to make sure that every child pre-K through 12 had an adult in their school assigned to them. And that adult needed to check in with them every week to build that relationship and keep them connected, because I knew that our kids in this sea of uncertainty that we were all living in, we all know that one of the best things we as adults can provide our children is predictability. And I knew that I needed to make sure that our children knew that just because you weren't physically coming to school, your school community was still there. And so we really emphasize those connections and those relationships, because absent that, you're not going to teach algebra. It was hard enough getting kids to show up, some kids, right, who really needed us most. It was hard to connect with them in person. Now we're going to have to do it through a video screen. If you don't have those relationships, they're not going to show up through a video screen if they weren't going to show up in person, where they could at least see their friends and socialize, right? That was a compelling reason to show up at school. So it was really putting those fundamentals in place and then focusing on some relationship building that then led to, and now what do we do about instruction? Fortunately or unfortunately, we were in the midst, we were in the last year of a new math materials adoption. We were in the midst of preparing for a language arts adoption. So we've used this as an opportunity to shore up really high quality materials for our kids and our teachers to use. And that's been great. And I think our teachers and paraeducators and others have come up with some really brilliant, creative ways to, engage in teaching and learning and deliver instruction online. But I think what we've also learned, Rob, is that while for some of our kids, this online experience has really worked for them. But when I say some, I'm talking about a very small percent. The vast majority need in-person instruction. We as human beings need in-person interaction. And so I don't care how good, even our very best teachers on their best days, firing on all cylinders with all of the materials they needed, that would still fall short of that happening in person. And we just have to acknowledge that.
Absolutely. There is no question. And I absolutely agree with you. I feel like I'm in church almost, wanting to say amen, amen, amen. Because you're exactly right. The importance of that relationship. And of course, that's one of the foundational pieces to the Highline Promise, but the importance of that relationship and really thinking about, and I appreciate the way you said that comes first. The relationship has to be there. And of course, the first is making sure children are fed and they're safe and we have that access for them, but that relationship piece, and then really thinking about coming back to school and preparing for a new school year, knowing that those relationships may not be, as hard as we've worked at those, may not be where we want them to be, and having to reestablish structure. You mentioned kids and every single one of us appreciate and need predictability. And that was not to be had for any of us, particularly as we still try to figure out what's working and not working, and whether or not we're going to be wearing masks going into the next school year, and all kinds of things that are still out there. Predictability has been in short supply. And so structure has been in short supply, and reintroducing our students into the schoolhouse and and that structure is going to be interesting.
Yeah.
As you're thinking around that, what are kind of the things you're thinking about as you're beginning the work to get ready for the 2021-22 school year?
Well, Rob, there's so much debate right now. Learning loss, don't say learning loss, blah, blah, blah. Let's just be real. Kids are resilient. I think that we will be surprised by how little some of our kids have lost and saddened by how much others have. I think it's going to be every point on that spectrum, right? However, I will say I am, we're focusing in Highline on an acceleration versus remediation model. I think that, we're going to meet our kids where they are, give them challenging grade level content and help them through small group and intensive supports and tutoring and wraparound services, make up for whatever academic time they lost. I'm pretty confident that we're going to be able to do that. And maybe I'm a little Pollyanna-ish on this, or wishful thinking, magic beans and pixie dust, but I'm actually worried less about our students making up the academic or meeting our students' academic needs. I'm more worried about the social, emotional, interpersonal losses they've had. And I will tell you, I'm already seeing this in a sad way playing out. So we are doing in-person graduations this year. We have 11 ceremonies. So I'm smack dab in the middle. I'm 6 down, 5 to go. And granted, they're smaller. So we could only allow 3 tickets per graduate because we had to space out. Everyone's in masks. So the venue is not full by any means, right? And the graduates are very subdued for the most part. There's just not that. And I think there's lots of ways that we can, reasons we can probably put to that, but I think just not being used to being out and about, not sure how do I interact with this person? When we first came back in hybrid, I remember walking into a kindergarten classroom and, one of the great joys of kindergartners, and there are many, is they'll hug anyone. Absolutely. And so first I walk into the room and this little 5-year-old comes running up to hug me and 3 adults jumped in the way to body block her. And I thought, how have our children internalized this scary sort of, sci-fi world that we've been living in, where everyone is masked, nobody touches each other. If you touch something, someone rushes to wipe it down before they touch it. The impact of that is what I'm more concerned about. How do we get our kids comfortable again with real human interaction? And I'm not sure we're thinking enough about that and talking enough about that.
I think you're right on. And, as you were describing that moment in the kindergarten classroom where the child just naturally wanted to give you a hug and wasn't permitted to, and began to talk through that, I was thinking about, we've done a lot of thinking about and talking about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and how to build and help students grow resiliency. And it almost feels like this pandemic has become an ACE for so many of our children, an adverse childhood experience. And we're just really understanding how those impact adults later in life because they had these experiences when they were really young. And so you're describing the child who wants to give you a hug, not being able to hug. And I was sitting there wondering, now, what does that do for that child as an adult and future relationships, right? And how does that impact them? And you mentioned the safety piece and all of the worry about, hand sanitizer for everybody all the time. And it's truly interesting and it's truly a challenge. But, like you, I believe in our educators and I believe in our school systems. And I believe that we'll meet this challenge, as it evolves, and we'll continue to do that.
Yeah, I think I just want to say, I think the one thing too that is comforting in a sad way is that this has been a universal experience. Right. So, this isn't like a natural disaster that hits one particular part of the country and the community, the kids, the families, the staff have to figure out how to rebound. We are all going to have to rebound from this. And yes, where you are, children have had something closer to a normal school year than children where I am. That said, they have all had to deal with what we've just been talking about, right? Sort of the mask, all of that. And so I think the fact that this is something that we all experience to some degree my great hope is that accelerates our recovery.
Yes.
Because we're truly all in it together. And we can really learn from one another. So I hope that universal experience leads to a quicker universal recovery.
I absolutely agree with you. You mentioned being Pollyanna a little earlier, and perhaps I can be Pollyanna as well. But as I've reflected on it, I've kind of thought about thinking in terms of history about the greatest generation, the generation that kind of followed World War II and all that they accomplished as a generation. And so the generations that followed, including ours, didn't live up to that mark by a long stretch. And so there's much hope. I have much hope that our children in this generation, because they've had this universal experience of going through the pandemic, that it will strengthen them to be the next coming of the greatest generation.
Boy, I got to tell you, if that turns out to be true, then, this wasn't all in vain.
There you
right?
go.
Yeah.
Silver lining.
Yeah.
So you mentioned graduation, several down and several more to go. And so as we go through graduation each year, we have the opportunity, whether individually or in front of an entire group, to share a message with graduates. As you've had the opportunity to talk to seniors about to graduate and as they graduate, what has been your message this year to the class of 2021 as they prepare for what comes next for them?
Well, this is really interesting, Rob. In Highline, the superintendent does not give a graduate address. Board members do. So I actually don't give a message to the graduates. I just accept the class. That was the tradition here when I arrived. I think, if anything, my message to seniors, were I giving an address right now, would be that I hope that one of the greatest lessons that they take from this experience is, even in the most challenging of times, fight to hold on to your humanity and honor the humanity of others. We have seen, I think, people rising to these challenges in wonderful ways. But I've also seen a meanness, right? And a real inability for some people. And because this is a leader podcast, I'm speaking about leaders. I think that people have ceased to see leaders as human beings first and titles second. And so I hope that our young people take away the lesson that people first, right? And when times get tough, try to realize what's motivating that person's anger, what's motivating that person's hurt, and how, rather than react to it, how can you understand it and lean in and give that person what they need in that moment? I think when I'm my best leadership self, that's what I do. Now, sadly, I'm not always my best leadership self. Sometimes I get really defensive and ticked off. But we've all been through so much. And I just hope that we can remember to try to be kind and compassionate moving forward.
Absolutely. What a powerful message to simply say, let us honor the humanity in others. And that'll preach, Dr. Enfield. Let us honor.
I hope so, Rob.
Well, again, what an incredible delight and pleasure for me to spend some time with you, Dr. Enfield. I just want to say thank you for speaking up, for speaking out. Thank you for living this promise and for being a mentor and a leader across our country. I truly appreciate you.
Well, Rob, thank you. And thank you for your leadership. And I wish you, your family, and your school community a healthy, restful, happy summer and a great 21-22 school year.
Thank you. Absolutely. And the same to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Imagine the incredible outcomes for students if every student were known by name, by strength, and by need. Now that is a promise worth keeping. I want to thank you for spending time with me today. And thank you for all that you do for every student, every teacher, and every staff member. You are making a difference. If no one else has told you, I want you to know that I believe in you. Good day.
Thank you for listening to the EdLeader podcast. Please subscribe to the podcast and consider leaving a review with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts so that we may continue to grow the EdLeader community. We hope that you have enjoyed your time with Dr. Jackson. Until next time.